Well, hey there, folks. This is Scott once again, and welcome to another review. This time I'm doing the review for the Romance in the Stone sequel, The Jewel of the Nile. And yes, I have the Blu-ray. It's got a good amount of features, and I still enjoy the sequel to an extent. It's a decent, solid sequel, not quite as good as the original, but you still have Douglas, Turner, and DeVito in there, so that's mainly the good thing. Unfortunately, I guess you can say what the drawback is. And there's others to it. You don't have Robert Zemeckis, excuse me, because more than likely he was already working on Back to the Future by this point, or at least finishing up the film. So, and the thing is that you also don't have Diane Thomas writing the screenplay. The screenplay was written by Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal. Let me get to the director, and I'll talk about that for a bit. So. The director is Lewis Teague. He had previously done Cujo and the Stephen King Cat's Eye film anthology. So yeah, he would later go on to do Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn. He did a film with Rutger Hauer called Wedlock, I believe. It also had Mimi Rogers and Joan Chen was in it or something like that. And it seems like this is really his only highest grossing film that I know of, because this film did reasonably well. I think it made almost roughly the same amount as the first one. And worldwide, it made $96.7 million. Of course, the budget was a lot higher this time. The budget was $25 million. But anyways, the film was also produced by Douglas yet again through his company. And like I said, the writers were Mark Rosenthal and Lawrence Connor. And I believe Mark Rosenthal was interviewed on this Blu-ray. Basically, they took the features from the special edition DVD and placed it on there. So once in a good while, Fox wasn't lazy in transferring all the extras from their DVDs to the Blu-ray. But there have been Blu-rays where they didn't have that, but you know the drill. Anywho, and you also have, of course, Douglas, Turner, and DeVito back. With the new edition, I take it back. You also have Holland Taylor making a short appearance as Joan's editor, Gloria. With the new cast, you have Spyros Focus, I guess, playing the new kind of villain in there as Omar Kalefka. You have Avner Eisenberg, who's basically, the Al Jawhar, basically known as the Jewel. And then you have Daniel Peacock, who is the rock promoter that you see kind of variously here and there. And of course, Holland Taylor, like I mentioned earlier. But yeah, and the film was, the music was also composed by a different composer. His music was decent, but not quite as great as Silvestri's. This Jack Nashish. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I know they did another film after this called Revenge with Kevin Costner and Toby Quinn and Madeline Stowe, which is a pretty decent film I liked, but it's kind of like a darker, brutal kind of little bit of romance in there type of movie. But there you have it. But the year before, he actually did another he actually did a good job on this one film that unfortunately was panned by a lot of critics because it starred then, Bill Murray when he was attempting to do his first dramatic role, and people panned it for that. And that's the film Razor's Edge that Jack composed for. And I think it's a sadly underrated film. I think it showed that Bill Murray could be versatile when he's not doing comedies. So yeah. But yeah, I'll get to the overall plot here. Basically, the film takes place like 6 months after the events of Romance in the Stone. Joan Wilder and Jack Colton, they seem to be having a nice, good life, but unfortunately we see that Joan's kind of struggling with her writing. Basically, in the very beginning, we basically see the scene where she's trying to tell the story of, just imagining with her and Jack in this kind of like adventure on like pirates and stuff like that, where apparently they're about to get married and they're interrupted by this pirate ship, and Jack actually vows that he would come back. The character decides, I guess they're playing their selves or whatever, or I can't remember specifically for sure, but basically Douglas's character sacrificed himself, and Douglas, vows to, face her feels alone, and she's kind of narrating, and then unexpectedly it cuts to the fourth wall where Jack yells like, "Hey, Joan!" and then the way she looks out, and then we cut to Jack, doing the little kind of water skiing on apparently on the France, apparently at the south of France port, pretty much. And then she's going over this, trying to figure out what to write. She's like, "Could this be the end of of my life as I know it, or my career, and she actually frustratingly like throws the typewriter into the water just because she's suffering from writer's block and can't seem to write anything. And apparently they come to the realization that the romance has kind of grown stale and whatnot. So because of this, she wants to return to New York, while Jack kind of wants to sail around the world, and he wants to head to Greece just to continue on their adventure and whatnot, and sail around the world. But unfortunately, Jack also forgets to do certain things. Like, for example, he doesn't get the car that he wanted. Instead, he has like the motorcycle moped that he has, because he thought, it was on Tuesday, and then Joan tells him, This is Tuesday, Jack. So yeah, there you go. A little bit of the humorous moments. And then apparently when they're at this book engagement where we encounter Gloria, Holland Taylor's character, coming back for briefly amount of time, basically telling her that Jack's definitely not the marrying kind and not really the committed type, almost to an extent. But eventually Joan encounters this very charming Omar, who's played by Spiros Fokas. He's a charming Arab ruler from basically Africa who basically wants Joan to write his autobiography, and because of the way he's able to charm her and whatnot, she eventually accepts, which Jack definitely protests and even said, "I thought you want to go back to New York," and she's like, "Things have changed," and now she ends up. They end up, they say or Jack says, maybe we do need a break and whatnot. So they actually are temporarily broken up for a bit, which is kind of what the main problems I have with the film. And then eventually, she eventually goes off with Omar, and Jack, returns to his boat. But then we later encounter Ralph, Danny DeVito's character, who somehow managed to hit Jack down somehow one way or another, and actually holds him at gunpoint. But then one of the people that basically Ralph is wanting to get the stone or the gem that Jack and Joan found, and then they're like really interrupting there. He has like several knives thrown at him. He's wearing some kind of coat which makes him drop the gun, and apparently this guy who's also an Arab, Tarak, Paul David Maged, he basically informs Jack about Omar's true intentions, like he's not the peaceful ruler that he's claiming to be, and that he's a very bad man, and he claims that Omar has the jewel of the Nile, and Douglas is not willing to accept, and Ralph actually wants to actually go on this and says, "Hey, Jack, buddy, let's help this guy out," and whatnot, and Jack's still not willing to go, but right when Jack finishes up, his boat explodes, and earlier we saw a diver put something on there, which turns out to be a bomb, actually. And as a result, since the Angelina, which is Jack's boat's name, explodes, he decides that he has to team up with Ralph and help Tarak find Joan and the fabled jewel. And then we see Joan arrive with Omar in Africa, see some nice little interactions with Joan, taking photos, and she eventually comes to take photo of this writing I think is in Arabic, I guess. But Omar's guards eventually take her camera away and take the film out and hand her camera back. And while everything seems, Omar lives in this nice little palace and whatnot, you hear a scream here and there, and Omar claims that it's a cat, apparently, which probably isn't true, more than likely. We come to learn that in the end, basically Omar is not really forthcoming about who he really is. He's rather a brutal dictator, rather than the enlightened ruler that he claimed to be, claiming to want to, unite the Arab world. And eventually she comes to encounter this Al Johar, the actor Avner Iceberg, who is basically the jewel of the Nile, whom Omar fears, because apparently he can do some kind of magic and whatnot, which is what Omar's trying to perfect and trying to look like he's some kind of magical healer and whatnot. And basically, whenever Omar eventually finds Joan with the jewel, and Joan claims that Jack will be on his way to save her, and he says that Jack is dead and whatnot, and won't be coming for her, and of course she has that, sadness in her, and believing that maybe he's dead, but kind of hopeful that he isn't, which of course, it's not the case. Eventually, Jack does come down and find her, and along with Ralph, and they basically say, "I thought you were dead," and whatnot, and Ralph has like a brief little taunting explanation, and then apparently he decides to go off and not stay with them, which is kind of the problems I have, because I felt like the whole script and their characters are kind of written differently and not executed as well as they should be. So eventually, both Joan and Jack and the jewel escape to this. Eventually, escape the city or this little palace or city that he's in this hijacked F-16 fighter jet, and eventually he uses the guns to kind of break through. But to finally break through the main gate, he actually uses somehow accidentally slams his fist down on one of the buttons, and it launches a rocket and blows up the main door. And then they eventually get out of there. And then eventually Ralph is actually captured by the Turok's rebel, by basically himself, I should say, and who is sworn to protect the jewel, and he eventually threatens Ralph, and Ralph, very upset that Jack left him, which I still don't get why he didn't just tag along with them. I guess they should have executed certain parts of the screenplay and the overall film to some degree. But and getting to that, Jack and Joan, Jack's suggesting that they should get going and head to the nearest airport or wherever they can go. Joan's like, I made a commitment to help the jewel to what was the Cassadir, I think, Cassadir. I can't remember the city they're supposed to take him to. And then they have Jack and Joan have this little brief scuffle. He's like, "What is it with you?" And eventually Jack decides he is going to help out because, eventually Omar's army and them try to track him down. In fact, Omar even tries to shoot a rocket launcher at them, but eventually he only ends up hitting part of the mountain that even Jack and Joan are hidden in there, and they actually make fun of and taunt Omar for not being able to hit the right place where they're at. So anyways, eventually when they encounter the Nubian mountain African tribe during the dance, where Jack has to kind of fight to keep his woman, because apparently they're not married and whatnot, and this big tall African American fellow that's strong and very brawny, him and Jack kind of have a toe-to-toe fight where basically that big tall African American is having his way with Jack, just picking him up, kind of throwing him down here and there, and then Jack somehow is able to grab a vase and just smack it on his head, and then try to roll him on the floor to make it look like he actually had won, which in the way he did, but Jack has his ass kind of handed to him by this guy, so yeah. And during the same time, Ralph, claims that he despises Jack, and he's like, I despise Colton. I spit on him. So yeah, and then Turok, notices that Ralph is trying to, help him out and try to be like one of them. He has to walk on these hot coals, barefoot and whatnot, and eventually does, even though it hurts him. It hurts like hell, more than likely. And he's like, "Hey, yeah, I'm one of you, yeah." And then during this little dance at the Nubian tribe, Jack and Joan's romance is definitely rekindled, where they, sleep together and confess their love for each other and whatnot. And then once they start heading down Kadir, that's the place. When they start to head down to Kadir, Joan confesses the truth that, he was looking, because Jack was looking for the jewel, which is why he tagged along. Joan reveals that Al-Jawhara is actually, in fact, the jewel himself, of course. So, and And Douglas is like, damn, I thought we had a chance. So, they start to head down a train in order to get to Kadir, but they also encounter Omar's guards, and there's a little squabble where apparently between Jack and Omar's guards, which eventually he's able to subdue and throw off the train, and then when Tarak's men and Ralph himself, who is now dressed in much different clothing like Tarak's men, he tries to chase Jack down and ends up not even realizing that when the train goes in the tunnel, he ends up, when he's riding the horse, he ends up hitting the side of the tunnel, all dazed out. And when Jonah and Jack are trying to elude Omar's man, eventually they actually come into Omar, to where Omar's at exactly, where he's in this room revealing his plans, and he eventually has Jack and Joan tied up in Kadir, I believe, and that basically Omar intends to use the smoke and mirror special effect provided by the British rock promoter, which I just mentioned, to convince the onlookers that he is the prophet that will unite the Arab world, pretty much. And eventually, like I said, Omar suspends Jack and Joan with ropes over a deep pit, to which, apparently Omar has read her novels. It was taken from a scenario where basically rats will be eating one part of the rope, and I believe Joan's rope is being trickled down with this acid. And eventually, somehow, one way or another, along with Tarak, Ralph arrives along with the tribe and revives some time to rescue. I forgot to mention that Al-Jahar was also tied up somewhere, but not as badly as Joan above the pit and whatever. So, but Ralph comes in and rescues them, and then Omar takes center stage, to address the Arab people. Jack and Joan were able to disrupt the ceremony by going into the main control rooms, by flipping the switches, moving Omar back and forth, and there's apparently a fire, and it's engulfing the stage. And then we also see Al-Jahar walk out of there like somehow with no problem. It's not affecting him. He's not dead from it. And then eventually, Jack and Joan are eventually separated, while Jack, is able to, fight off more of Omar's guards. And then Ralph encounters one guard in particular, and actually does the little fire where he blows fire at the guards, and the guard runs away. And Ralph's like, "Whoa, this thing works!" He basically just lights it and just does that to the guard, and it like blinds him or something. And Ralph is like surprised that it actually works. So yeah. And then eventually, as the fire continues to grow and get bigger, Omar eventually corners Joan, and with the help of Ralph, by using a giant crane, Jack gets on the hook of it. And then when Omar is advancing on Joan, Jack is able to kick Omar off the side of the kind of like the tower or whatever you want to call it, and he gets kicked off by Douglas and falls off to the side and into the flames. And then we see that earlier, since Al-Jahar has rised and walked safely through the flames, fulfilling the prophecy that he is the true spiritual leader, and basically he should be the Arab ruler. And as that's going on, Jack and Joan embrace one another. And then the following day, there's a ceremony of Jack and Joan where they are married by Al-Jahar. And we see Ralph is there. We also see that Gloria has somehow gotten there as well. And Ralph is actually surprisingly happy, but he kind of laments that he's gained pretty much nothing. But then Tarak, acknowledges that he's a true Sufi friend and actually gets a jeweled dagger. And they all, not shake hands, but they go grab hands. And Ralph's like, "Hey guys, Sophie's rule." And then we see Jack and Joan, sail away down the Nile and whatever, and we see during the credits we see Ralph and Gloria and several other members of the Sufi tribe, and some probably other additional members, and that's how the film ends. So, but basically, I really enjoyed this film for the most part. You still had some great chemistry between Douglas and Turner, and then Ralph provided the additional comic relief type of humor. The main problem, or the pros, I mean not the pros, but the cons to this is that I feel like the way the script or the way it was executed, I feel like it for the most part wasn't really Jack and Joan. Like, don't like how Joan just easily took Omar's offer of writing a biography, because she doesn't even know the guy, and yet she's willing to just jump at the chance at writing an autobiography of this guy that you barely even know. And that's just poor character writing for the most part. And from what I understood, Turner was not a big fan of the script. In fact, she tried to pull out of it, but then Fox threatened her with a $25 million lawsuit, and she signed on. And then she also demanded that they rewrite a good portion of the script. So I don't know what was originally on there, but apparently Turner didn't like it and almost pulled out because of that. But they, of course, like I said, Fox was threatening her with that suit, and that's why she had to forcefully accept that. And when they were on the plane, apparently, according to one interview that Turner was describing, how this is definitely not the character. On the plane to Morocco, because apparently some of this film was filmed in Morocco, France, and the place where her book signing was at during Cannes. That's where it was filmed at, and a little bit in Utah, actually. But yeah. Turner was very also disappointed with the fact that Diane Thomas didn't write the screenplay. But from what I understood, Thomas was asked to consult on the alterations of the script and whatnot, so she did help out in some ways. This was before her death in October of '85, like several weeks before Jewel of the Nile would premiere, because this film came out in December of 1985. This movie came out a year after, and I don't think they should have rushed it that quickly. That's the problem I have. I felt the film felt a bit rushed, and some of the characterizations of Jack and Joan just were not consistent with this film. Such as Joan just jumping at the chance to join this Omar, and then you find out that that he's not the person that he claims to be, and then somehow another problem I have is how in the hell did Ralph track Jack that quickly? He doesn't come across as really that smart. I mean, I don't think he's a dumb character, but I don't understand how Ralph was able to find Jack or track him down all the way from Cartagena, Colombia to like France. Did he somehow get a computer or something? I don't know. But yeah, those are the problems I have. I felt the characterizations weren't great, but what else can I say? Maybe the musical score is not as great, but that's not the problem. And I think Lewis Teague does a... I'm trying to really think here, folks. Just the characterizations of Jack and Joan are not the same, and they're not executed to the full extent. And it's just the problem is the characterizations that I have a problem with. But yeah. But other than that, the chemistry is still there. Going back to the cons, I don't like how they broke them up, but I can understand. But in a way, I can kind of understand it, because sometimes romance can go a little stale, and sometimes you might need a little break and get away from each other for a little bit. But there you go. But yeah, to the pros, the chemistry between Turner and Douglas is still there, still fresh as ever. It's very beautifully shot. I feel like they really expand on the locations a little bit better than Romance in the Stone did. You get to see Morocco for all the exoticness to it, and the cinematography still looks pretty good. It still looks good on the Blu-ray here, and there still has some funny moments, like whenever Douglas is really upset when Joan decides she must make a commitment, and he's like I said earlier, like, what is it with you? And then, of course, the fun little fight scene between Douglas and this big, tall African-American Nubian guy. It's done very well. And then apparently, I do like DeVito's moments where he gets his moments to shine. But I also don't like how they didn't have DeVito go with Jack and Joan. I felt like this was a moment for him to really, make his character even more likable. He really has turned a corner, not till where it's like 5-10 minutes in, he finally realizes the error of his ways, where Jack is being actually truthful and not, being the cunning con man that he usually is. That's one of the other kind of cons, but at least Ralph, towards the last several minutes, becomes a little bit more likable character, I guess you can say. And what else? The music score is really good. Is good. The love theme of Jack and Joan is actually done very well by Jack. I can't believe I'm saying Jack, but I'll call him Jack in the composer. Especially when they're in their heat of the moment type of lovemaking, where they're at the Nubian, having their alone time together, and it is a couple that is they may be stubborn, but they're independent and they have loyalty to each other, and they're willing to fight for it. And yeah, the acting is still really great. There's a reason why Douglas and Turner have that chemistry, and that's why they would work again along with DeVito in The War of the Roses, for example. They still had that great unique chemistry, which was off screen, and they remained I guess they still remain good friends, even though despite the fact that Turner had some differences with her character Joan in this sequel. But yeah, what else can I say? I guess Spyro Focus doesn't do a bad job of Omar, but he doesn't really have like a huge intimidating factor. He just has this certain dialogue or certain presence that doesn't come across. I guess that's one of the flaws, that he's not quite as intimidating, even though the acting of that actor is not the problem. Just it could have been a little more intimidating, except for the part where he corners her right before he's kicked off by Jack and whatnot. And the guy that plays the Al Johar, he's not bad. He's actually, from what I read, he was a clown that was from Queens or from New York and did circus acts and whatnot. And I think he did magician tricks or something. I'm not sure. But yeah, DeVito, like I said, when he's given moments to shine, he does very well. And so basically the cinematography, the music, the acting, and the chemistry is still all there. That's one of the pros I can definitely say. But just the major part of what brings this film down is how Joan decides to just simply take Omar's offer. It just felt like inconsistent writing, and how Ralph was able to track Jack, and then for some reason they decide not to have him follow them or team up, which is not done till like the very tail end, is one of the problems I have. But overall, it's a decent sequel, very solid sequel. I mean, you still have some great adventurous moments, danger adventures and fun-filled moments. But yeah, overall, if you've already seen Romance in the Stone, give the sequel a look or a chance. And I definitely would recommend it to an extent. Sadly, we never got that third film. Apparently, it was rumored to be called The Crimson Tide, where apparently Jack and Joan would have had their kids or teenagers, and they would have to go on this adventure to find some kind of... Let me see if I can find it. The Crimson Eagle, where they're supposed to be taking their teenage kids to Thailand, where they're blackmailed into stealing a priceless statue or something, and then nothing ever went on to a draft, and nothing really happened, except supposedly, like mid-2000s, Douglas said that there was a chance for a sequel, but that never really happened, and there was going to be a reboot, and then that never happened. So yeah, sadly, these are the only two films that we're ever going to get of Jack and Joan. So, but yeah, I think the sequel was decent, and if, like I said, I'd go give it a watch if you can. You can rent it on YouTube and have a nice, fun, romantic-filled adventure. So yeah, it still has that, but just not as great as Romance in the Stone. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here, folks, and I will see you in another video. Whatever it will be, hopefully it will be entertaining as this one. If you like this, go ahead and like, subscribe, and do whatever. So, all right. I'll see you later, folks. Later.